Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum, dear viewers, to our new series, The Psychology of Salah on Ahlulbayt TV. And in this series, which is going to consist of 10 30-minute programs, we're going to be analysing the spiritual developments or spiritual components of Salah a little bit more deeply. As we know, often we get onto the janamaz and we may go through the rituals of the Salah, but not always be internally connected to those rituals and rites. So inshallah, in this program, we're going to be reflecting on how we can get more out of our Salah and go deeper into its meaning. And my guest is Ghulam Abbas Laka, who is going to, inshallah, enlighten us on these aspects. Assalamu alaikum.
Alaikum salam.
So thank you very much for giving us your time to look more deeply at the psychology of Salah. And I guess the first question is, many people may feel, well, I'm very devoted in my Salah. I believe, I have no problem with my belief in Allah and Ahlulbayt. So why do I need to look more deeply, or what is there to get out of the Salah? Is there anything more to get out of it than perhaps a feeling of devotion?
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. I begin in the name of Allah, the Merciful, the Compassionate. I think this is a topic that requires a fresh perspective for each generation. Each generation has to come to this pool of Salah and drink for themselves to satiate the particular thirst that arises for each period in history. I think we're living in a time now, in the 21st century, where the challenges that we face, particularly with regard to mental health, issues ranging from anxiety, from stress and other causes, as well as depression and a whole myriad of other mental health challenges, require us to take a fresh perspective at the entirety of the Islamic teachings to see how can we benefit more from what we're already doing. So these discussions on the psychology of Salah are not about placing further burdens on people. No, far from it. It's the opposite. The objective is to see how can we get greater benefit from what we are already doing.
Yeah.
And one of the ways we do that is to change our approach to Salah. And when we think about why is it that we should even think about our approach to Salah, well, the primary sources in Islam, the Holy Quran and the teachings of the Holy Prophet, peace be upon him and his holy progeny, as clarified and expounded upon by the Ahlulbayt, guide us repeatedly that it's not just sufficient to undertake the daily prayers, to do them as a legal obligation, as something that is farad, that is wajib, that you have to do it. And you've got to do a particular thing in a particular way, at a particular time in your day, 5 times a day. Well, there's more to it than that. Yeah. There's far more benefit available. And when we look at the Holy Quran, it is absolutely categoric on this. And I think it's fitting that we begin with the Holy Quran because it sets the foundation for not just the how of it, but the why of it as well. And the verses that I want to look at the outset really set the platform for the remainder of our 10 discussions on this. So first is Surah Ma'un, Surah 107, verses 4 and 5. It has a really stark warning. And so our discussions begin with a warning for what happens if we just undertake our prayers in a very ritualistic way. And the verse is, for waylun lil musallin, woe upon those who pray. It's not about those who don't pray and those who have abandoned their prayers. Woe upon those who do pray. Well, why? Well, it answers that. It says, alladhina hum an salatihim sahun. That those who, in relation to their prayers, are heedless. Now, sahun can be translated in many different ways. But I think the psychology of this is in relation to being disengaged, such that we may do it physically, but we are not there.
Yeah.
With the presence of our heart, our mind, of our spirit may be absent, but we may physically be doing the action. In which case, we can see why we might be warned with fawailun, woe upon them, because actually if you do it in that way, it becomes a source of stress. That, oh my goodness, how much time do I have left? How am I going to manage with my lunch break for the afternoon prayers? So the notion of salah, rather than being a process by which we rejuvenate ourselves, a time when we recharge our batteries and go forth into our lives refreshed, re-energized, galvanizing all our forces to be effective beacons of light in whichever sphere of activity we're in. Rather than that, it actually switches to becoming a source of stress and depleting our time and our energy, when actually it's supposed to be a vehicle to expand our awareness and illuminate the activities of our lives, whatever they may be. And it's the second aspect that the Quran then points to, that whilst there is woe upon those who are heedless about their prayers, for those who take a different approach, there's a different statement about them. So, Surah Al-Mu'minun, Surah 23, verses 1 and 2, and then subsequently in verse 9. It says, it begins emphatically asserting, قَدْ أَفْلَحُ الْمُؤْمِنُونَ, that surely, I mean, the preface of the word qad really makes it emphatic, almost renders it in the past tense, really, in terms of something that's a fait accompli, something that is absolute. That for surely the true believers have been successful. قَدْ أَفْلَحُ الْمُؤْمِنُونَ. Well, that raises the question, so who are they? And why have they been successful? And both the who and the why are identified in the next verse. الَّذِينَ هُمْ فِي صَلَاتِهِمْ خَاشِعُونَ. That these are people who, in relation to their prayers, are truly mindful. And in Surah Insan and Surah Dahr, we've got further verses that illustrate who these people are and what they did within their salah. And we've got various verses that illustrate the magnanimity of the Ahlulbayt alayhimussalam as being the perfect exemplars of the mu'minun who have been truly khashi'un in terms of mindful and present. And so it raises the question, so what does khashi'un really mean? If we just translate it in a literal sense of being humbly submissive, then actually I think psychologically we're missing the point, frankly. Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, in His magnanimity, in His grace, these discussions are a grace. The fact that we have the ability to reflect on our psychology, this metacognition of thinking about our thinking, that is a grace. So such a exalted Lord does not really need our submissive service. Rather, we need to experience this sense of khashi'un for our own benefit. This sense of awe and presence and opening, such that when we are engaging in that salah, we break the shackles of rumination in terms of thinking about the language of psychology and psychotherapy. So for instance, if we look at approaches to mental health, such as cognitive behavior therapy, one of the key terms that we see in there, as we also see in other forms of interventions for depression and anxiety that are recommended by the NHS in the UK, such as mindfulness-based cognitive therapy, there is a common theme that runs through them, which is rumination, which is basically thinking about something repeatedly. It's like chewing a piece of gum long after the flavor is gone, but we still do it. And we often find ourselves that in salah is when a lot of those thoughts come back and that tape recorder starts playing again and again on repeat. Whereas actually what these verses are showing us is that if you are heedless about your salah, then you open yourself up to salah being hijacked by rumination and a whole set of other unhelpful ways of thinking patterns. Whereas if we are present and really mindful in our salah, we break those shackles of rumination and we open up the possibility of a whole new experience. But let's be very clear. Whilst the remainder of our discussions are all about disaggregating the process of salah from wudu to qibla to adhan, iqama, niyyah, takbiratul ihram, qiyam, ruku, how we rise from ruku, the process of qunut, and then sujood, and from sujood to tashahud, to salam, the entirety of the salah. At each step, indeed at each station of salah, there is something different to be gained.
Yeah.
There is a particular psychology, a spiritual psychology of each step of that salah that has a different, specific application to our lives. And let's look at a practical question. We have been instructed in the Islamic law to undertake this practice 10 times a day. Because if we look, the practice of going through the units of prayers, so we've got at least 2 units in each of the 5 prayers. So we've got at least 10 units, and we've got one of the common themes is the recitation of Surah Al-Fatiha, the opening chapter of the Holy Quran. And that raises the question of why. Why is it that in Salah we're supposed to recite Surah Al-Fatiha not just once, but 10 times in the day?
Yeah.
How is it, therefore, it raises the question, how is it that the Surah Al-Fatiha in the first rakat of Fajr in the morning may be different to our recitation in the middle of the day compared to at the end of the day? And these are aspects that, inshallah, we will look at subsequently in our discussions on Qiyam. But at the beginning, it's worth pointing out that in order to be able to experience this presence in Salah, it does not require greater time. What it does require is greater awareness. Because the one who we are connecting with is beyond time and beyond space. We remember that in the Miraj, in the ascension of the Holy Prophet, peace upon him, and his holy progeny, despite the length of his journey, it is said that the chain on his door was still moving when he returned. Such that the notion of distance traveled and experiences gained is relative. So even though we may have only 10 minutes for our salah at lunchtime because we're very busy, we must never allow our doubts to deceive us into thinking that those 10 minutes, because they are only 10 minutes in inverted commas, don't have the potential to be transformative. They do. Those 10 minutes can transform our experience, not just of that prayer, but for the rest of the day. Now, how it does that and what we need to do to achieve that is what these discussions are all about. And inshallah, the Quran guides us as to what we can achieve by the grace of Allah if we fulfill the teachings that we have in this relation. And in verse 9 of the same surah of Surah 23, Surah Mu'minun, it clarifies further this notion of how to approach the salah. وَالَّذِينَ هُمْ عَلَى صَلَوَاتِهِمْ يُحَافِظُونَ. That these people who are successful, these are the ones who, in relation to their worship and their prayers, they maintain it with a sense of safeguarding. So there is a sense of being entrusted with this sacred practice that we have received through generations of Muslims, going back to the Holy Prophet, peace upon him, and his holy progeny, so that we receive it as a gift that nurtures us and nurtures those around us, regardless of whether they are Muslim or not. Because a Muslim who has just said his or her prayers should be so illuminated that that light is shared with whosoever the person encounters. In the tradition of the one who brought that salah, of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, as being a rahmatun lil alameen, as being a blessing upon the entirety of creation. So that salah doesn't just remain as one of the items on our tick box of what we have to do each day as Muslims. No, it then becomes a vehicle for our progress, and the kind of vehicle that enables us to take others with us, so that it becomes a source of light and joy in the midst of the stresses and tribulations of 21st century existence.
Yeah, and very, very important points, because again, how parents may be trying to raise their children to pray. Alhamdulillah, we have many children out there who are very conscientious of their salah, from a young age, and voluntarily, do their salah like exactly on time and everything. But sometimes we find that the methods of teaching the next generation the salah can emphasize the performing of the salah without talking about or thinking about what is going on inside the person. So perhaps if there is some conflict going on in the family, let's say, and the child is upset and the parent is saying, have you prayed? Whatever's going on in the family can affect how that child feels about praying as well. So again, we can't expect any of us, and especially children, to kind of do the prayer in a perfect way without it being connected to what's going on, internally.
Yes, indeed. I mean, it's very difficult to be present if we are absent to what's happening within us. And so part of salah is a recognition of the weather patterns internally, to allow that to manifest in the light of the one who enables us to cope with that. Indeed, in the light of the one in whom the darkness dissolves. And it's important to be aware of the darkness within, whether it's stresses, whether it's anxieties, whether it's our relationship with ourselves. So one of the things we learn from salah is how it can serve as a vehicle to change our relationship with ourselves, our relationship with others, and of course ultimately our relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This three-dimensional transformation of relationships is a key part of this process of becoming truly present in our salah, such that our mindfulness of salah captures both Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and us in relation to Him, without denying the reality that we may be facing, difficult though it may be, but rather acknowledging it and bringing it out into that space, so that in the light of that space, we may be able to change our experience of it and taste the sweetness of what salah promises to deliver.
Inshallah, thank you. So we were going to, we will be going through the wudu, qibla, niyyah, adhan, iqama, takbir, qiyam, and Surah Al-Fatiha, ruku', sajda, qunut, and the tashahhud, inshallah, in the forthcoming programs.
Inshallah, yes. And I think we need to also cross-reference the verses from the Holy Quran that we looked at with other aspects of sources, primary sources in the Islamic tradition, in terms of what the hadith of the Holy Prophet, peace upon him, and his holy progeny guide us in relation to this. So one of the teachings that is widely accepted across the Muslim tradition is that the Holy Prophet said, worship Allah as if you see Him. For even if you do not see Him, He sees you. And this notion of the encounter, of worshipping as though we are having and experiencing a sacred encounter, is what many of the spiritual scholars have identified. So for instance, Ayatollah Khomeini, Ahlulbayt soul, in his book Sirr Salah, the secrets of Salah, Salatul Arifin, the prayer of the mystics, of those who have an experiential connection with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Mirajus Salikin, the spiritual ascension of those who worship. These are ideas that come from his text, and one of the things he says is, in terms of our relationship to Salah, when we see the time of prayer approaching, how do we prepare mentally? Do we prepare as there is a chore that needs to be done, and so it's a resigned, how am I going to make time, and all the stressful thoughts that follow thereafter? Or is it like the encounter between the beloved and the beloved, where the beloved sees the time of connection approaching and has a rejoicing in the heart that that moment of encounter is coming closer. In this particular text, the analogy of having an invitation to the Sultan's palace is what is used. That if you had a special invitation for you personally to come at a particular time to have a special audience with the Sultan himself, how would you dress yourself? How would you bathe yourself? How would you prepare mentally for that engagement? And would you turn up late? And if you turned up on time, what composure would you have before you knocked on the door?
Yeah.
And we should never forget that that Takbirat al-Ihram, the Allahu Akbar that begins the Salah, is the knocking. And how we knock determines our experience of when we enter. So what the spiritual masters have been encouraging us to do is to think about the entirety of the encounter. And we see that in other hadith. So for instance, Imam Bakr alayhi salam, and this is in Sayyid ibn Tawus's text on the subject, he says that when a faithful servant stands in worship to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala from up on high looks down at him. Now this idea of being up on high is figurative because of course Allah is beyond time and space and is in our very essence of our being. And he says that Allah appoints an angel to watch over this person for the entirety of his prayer or her prayer, and says to this one who's worshipping that if only you knew with whom you are having this intimate communication and the blessings that are being bestowed upon you at this time, for if you did, you would never leave the place you are standing on. Just as an illustration of what we may be benefiting from without realizing we're benefiting from it. Because it comes back to the original question. If we are being required to undertake this practice 5 times a day, and we accept what the Holy Quran says, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala introduces himself over 100 times as the most merciful, the most compassionate, Ar-Rahman Ar-Rahim, then in his requirement for us to do something, it's for our benefit. So what are those benefits of Salah? And part of our discussions, a practical psychology discussion, has to have an element of self-reflection, of reflexivity, of thinking about our own practice. And this is where we need to stop and ask ourselves that when I pray, do I taste the sweetness of connection? Or am I amongst those upon whom there is woe because I am more stressed about something else I have to do? Yet another thing on my list of things to do. And if I am not as present, as mindful as I may be, what can I do to improve that? What is the opportunity that is available for me personally from this special invitation that I have received to participate in this spiritual banquet? And the courses of this banquet are what the remainder of our discussions will be about, inshallah.
Thank you. Yeah. I mean, I can speak, and perhaps many people, or people who haven't always been practicing and started practicing, but I remember coming into Islam, and the Salah was a very important experience. So, you know, doing sajda for the first time when you've never done that in your life, that's when you feel the impact of it. And I say impact, but actually it's a feeling of the burdens being lifted from your shoulders. It's a very kind of deep action to take, a deep connection to make to what, you know, lies beyond you, a connection to the infinite. And even just stepping on the janamaz, I mean, I remember having feelings that this is home. You know, the janamaz is the musalla, is the place where you are yourself. You know, sort of in the world you take on different roles and different masks and different personalities, maybe sometimes. But when you get on the janamas, that is when you're close to that location, we could say, where it's you, without any role, having to play any role, or just yourself and Allah.
It's really beautiful listening to your experiences of embracing Islam as an adult, because all too often, when those who have been born into the tradition have been taught at a young age, then that sanctity of that changes to becoming ritual, unfortunately. And I think it's also very important that Salah has a physicality to it. One of the things that I'd like to discuss, inshallah, is how the physical movements have a psychology of their own. In fact, in certain interventions, psychological interventions for depression, for anxiety, physical movement is part of it, and becoming aware of our body and our physicality is part of the journey of our psychological unfoldment and improving our mental health. And I think Salah provides some of those aspects in the physicality of sujood, of ruku, and in so doing poses a question that if we have been invited to a special theatre, that location, the janamas, the theatre in which our spiritual dreams are made manifest. And on the stage is really our soul. But if you go to a theatre and you sit in front of a pillar, so you can't actually see the stage, but you are there.
Yeah.
And then a friend asks you, so did you go to the show? And you say, yes, I went to the show. Did you go on time? Yes, I went on time. Did you stay for the entirety of the show? Yes. What effect did it have on you? Oh, nothing. Why? Oh, because I didn't really feel much. I didn't really see. I was sitting in front of a pillar. But I was there. I fulfilled my legal responsibilities, my fiqhi, my shari'i responsibilities about the salah. But I didn't really feel anything. And really the point about how we approach salah is to pick a good seat in that theatre. Right. And to pick a good seat requires active effort. We need to make our way to the front row in that theatre and actually, at some stage, step onto the stage rather than remaining passive and going through the stages in a rote fashion, like an autopilot. And sometimes we start salah and we finish and we think, oh, is it over? Before you might recall Takbiratul Ihram. Next thing you know, you're at Salam. And you think, what happened? Where was I?
Yeah.
Well, I certainly wasn't witnessing the sacred. So I must have been way in the back seat, sitting in front of a pillar, because I didn't notice anything. I didn't notice what had happened. Now, something was happening at a spiritual level, but I didn't notice it. I wasn't there. And this idea of absence is what we see in the verses we looked at from Surah Ma'un versus the verses of presence from Surah Mu'minun. And this is not easy. Lest there be any confusion, this active presence, this mindful action of Salah is very difficult. It is not by coincidence that the place where we pray is called the mihrab, the place of harb, the place of battle. So what battle are we talking about? This is the battle with ourselves, the battle to retain concentration, the battle to allow ourselves to be fully present. Because really the battle is with ourselves, because we serve as obstacles to ourselves. And we allow the ruminations of the past, of the mistakes, of worries about the future, to hijack that process. And keeping those at bay takes a degree of conscious, deliberate effort. Not effort in the sense of lifting weights, but effort in the sense of mindfulness, of being conscious, of this khashi'un, being reverentially in a state of awe-filled presence, where something really important is happening, that we are witnessing the connection between the beloved and the beloved within ourselves. That is hard. But that is the opportunity that stepping onto the prayer mat in our mihrab offers us. And that is why it's worth the effort to think about the psychology of every step and to disaggregate the process of salah, which inshallah we'll do later in our journey.
I think you're right that, again, the salah is a way of monitoring the weather conditions, internal weather conditions. And that, you know, people are going, again, through different things in life. They may feel exalted in the salah. They may feel the that bliss of intimacy with Allah. They will come away feeling peace when before they weren't feeling peace. Or at other times, sometimes it is, depending on the condition of the person, it can also be just getting it done is just about what a person can do. And sometimes perhaps, I don't know, that even that isn't bad. That if you're, again, whatever people are going through in life, I mean, I remember there was a narration saying that the jihad of the mother is to do her salah. Because, you know, as we know, especially mothers with young children, just to get your salah done is an achievement, let alone... So I suppose there are different levels to it, and perhaps if we don't always attain the highest level, we shouldn't kind of punish ourselves if you know, if we could just about kind of manage to do it,
exactly,
with sincerity.
Exactly. And if you're very rushed, that doesn't mean you are precluded from benefiting from it. Just because you've been invited to a banquet doesn't mean you have 3 hours to spend there. If you've only got 5 minutes to attend, at least take something that will nourish you. Have a taste of something that will help satiate the hunger and quench the thirst that we may have. So what our discussions are really about is how do we get something from each salah, no matter how rushed we might be and how tired we might be, physically and mentally, and indeed emotionally. So it's not about eating everything at every meal. No, it's about, and if you can, well, that's amazing if you can. But this is really about making sure we don't leave without having tasted something.
Thank you. So I think we're just coming up to the end of this introductory program, and inshallah we'll be, again, like I said, we'll be having inshallah 10 programs where we will be discussing the different components of the salah. But that is in itself, I think even this kind of introduction is very important to get us all thinking. And I suppose in a way we can again think of the salah as kind of, it's a bit like a ship that you're kind of sailing on the ocean, and you get, again, the smooth seas, the rough seas, and it's how we steer that ship, you know, in the best way. And yeah, to I think, I mean, I've had people write to me, I think one of the most common questions that people do ask is, how can I be present in my salah? And it is quite disturbing when you do reach a point of your salah, it's like, well, what did I just do? Yes. and how could I miss that? And
did I even do that? I can't remember.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah, so then we've got the issue of doubts, which has been dealt with by the ulama, like the rulings on doubts. But yes, inshallah, you know, this would be useful for adults, but also for adults and teenagers and adults raising children, and the elderly as well, if they, you know, they need that inspiration, especially later on in life. Often the elderly, they have more time, and they're heading into a time of life where there's more reflection going on about their life. So it will be, inshallah, you know, inspiring for all ages.
Inshallah. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. And thanks for watching. We will see you in the next program. Inshallah, do keep watching for a whole course on how to improve our salah internally and understand ourselves better, our psychology, within the Salah. Inshallah, we'll see you in the next show. Assalamu alaikum.